Great. So we're going to get started now with our cybersecurity panel. And before we get started, I just want to introduce our moderator today, Dr. Rafi Yahalom. He's an affiliated researcher at MIT Sloan School of Management, where he focuses on cybersecurity, innovations, and on cyber risk analysis models. He also serves as a consultant to leading organizations worldwide on cybersecurity strategy and business value. So Rafi, thank you so much for joining us today, and I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Can you hear me? Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Priscilla. This is exciting topic, exciting times, exciting all-star team of panelists. And I'm sure it's going to be interesting and fun, and we'll try to make it as exciting as the Bruins double overtime sudden death victory, playoff victory last night. So my focus, my research work is around cyber risk, generic models for quantifying and for reasoning about cyber risk in different applications, different organizations, different verticals, different use cases. Just as a few words of introductions before we introduce the panel and start covering different exciting angles of this important and growing and much more public topic, I want to emphasize a couple of points about what we're seeing around in terms of what's changing in the last year or two. All of us have heard increasingly about various cybersecurity events and incidents, mostly related to data leakage and data incidents over the last few years. Very significant, of increasing importance and impact. Cases ranging all the way from Target to Sony, in which data are related to financial records, to credit cards, to healthcare records in the case of Anthem, to intellectual property theft, and all the way to cases of email disclosure, whether it's DNC or whether it's Sony. All of them, for sure, are of increasing significance and impact, as we all know. But something to keep in mind is that the same approaches, similar risk modeling, similar malware, similar vulnerabilities in code will increasingly lead, in addition to all these impactful events, to events which are actually more state-changing, more physical, impactful, more direct financial loss impactful. And I wanted just to give some food for thought before we open it up, to talk about one example. And that example, again, is related to the SWIFT International Network, which many of you are familiar with. It's been around for a number of decades. It essentially sends millions of messages a day between banks to transfer funds internationally. About a year ago, slightly over a year ago, some folks in Bangladesh received a very authentic-looking email indicating that there is a new report comparing the recent Bangladesh economy stats to other countries in Asia, with an attachment to that email, which once the recipient clicked on, as often happens, infiltrated a malware into the systems of the Bangladesh bank. A short time afterwards, fund transfer instructions were submitted from Bangladesh, from servers on the Bangladesh system, to the New York Federal Bank to transfer money to various destinations, in particular to some Philippines casinos, at amounts which was totaled at close to $1 billion, 951 million, out of which 81 million were successfully transferred. The other 900 million were not transferred because of a typo in the destination of the fund transfer instruction. Not only were the fund transfer commands issued, but the malware actually deleted the database record for these fund transfers, as well as deleted the acknowledgement messages which come back through the system to confirm these transfers, and deleted them from the records. That whole scheme took place over a long weekend to time with a Bangladesh local holiday. Now, a few food for thought around something like that kind of incidents. Obviously, when we talk about the funds and the amounts of money and the fund networks such as SWIFT, we're talking about amounts which could be life-threatening for many financial organizations if done right. The question from a management perspective and that could hit and that could affect any organization around the world. Obviously, the cases of Bangladesh, the security controls were relatively weak, and there are unconfirmed suspicions that North Korea was behind these set of events. But whether it's a nation state, but there was nothing very sophisticated technologically that was done here that could not have been done by other groups of organized crime teams, et cetera, et cetera. The question from a risk perspective, from a management perspective, from a business perspective is, how do we determine what is our risk exposure? How do we determine how secure are we? How do we actually prioritize different considerations around decisions which relate to this kind of cases, which, as you can imagine, as you know, can apply across the board in many different scenarios, fund transfer being a simple, clear, but there are many other variants which exactly the same consideration, same questions, same issues related to trust, to boundaries of liabilities, to risk management, a term that we as financial students and practitioners have been involved with for many years. It's all about risk, but we're talking about a new type of risk here, which on one hand is evolving, is significantly impactful, but on the other hand, it's very immature in terms of understanding about what the different parameters are. So with this in mind, I want to introduce a great set of panels, and also a set of panels with a lot of experience, different angles on these issues, a lot of accomplishments, starting with Michael Sechrist, who is the Deputy Chief Security Officer at State Street Bank in Boston, one of the largest financial organizations in the world, which according to their website is responsible for 11% of the assets worldwide. Next to him is Chris Zanetos, who is a very accomplished entrepreneur. He's been affiliated with the Sloan School of Management. He's a graduate of the Sloan School of Management, has been a pioneer founder and CEO of Kurion, which is one of the pioneering early identity and access management companies, which have recently been acquired. And currently, Chris is a CEO and founder of another exciting early stage company called Cover Security, which he'll tell us a bit about. Next, we have William Baer, who is a consultant, a principal, a very distinguished and experienced cybersecurity leader at Ernst & Young, with previous experience in the leading organizations such as PwC and many others in leading the security function. And last but not least is Andrew Stanley, the Global Chief Security Officer of Philips, who has done amazing, exciting, cutting-edge accomplishments within Philips around not only managing risk, but modeling risk in a financial, using value at risk type of modeling. We are lucky at Sloan to be collaborating with Andrew and Philips, as well as with some of the other folks on the panel on different cutting-edge cybersecurity initiatives. So I suggest I want to let each one of the panelists introduce themselves, briefly tell a bit about their role and about their focus, and then we'll dive into a number of questions which I'll pose and open it up for questions which will come from the audience.
So I'll make one slight adjustment. I'm the vice president. As much as I love to take that promotion, I'll reset the record. But I'm vice president for and I lead the cyber threat intelligence team. And I've worked on many different parts of the information security program at State Street, which is one of the largest financial institutions in the U.S. Worked in incident response, worked on threat and vulnerability management and different aspects. So I have some idea of kind of the different angles of the programs there.
Great, thanks. I'm Chris Zanetos. Before I briefly explain my background, can I just see in the audience how many people consider themselves security professionals or involved in the security world? And how many consider themselves mostly financial? Good. That'll be useful for our conversation. I've been around for too long in the security market. I started with my first company, which was not Korean, working with Citigroup and a bunch of other financial industry companies. And I had to date myself, I had the pleasure of hearing John Reed at Citibank say that the bank is the network and the network is the bank, which he said in the early 90s, which back then was revolutionary. And today we take it for granted. But that sort of set me off on, and I think we'll come back to some of the themes around the understanding of your company being the network and the network being the company as we go on. So after doing that work, I started, as Rafi said, a company called Curran, which is focused on making sure the right people had the right access to the right resources and did the right things with that access. So we tried to improve your lives, those of you in the financial world. So when you hired people, automatically they got the right access. When you promoted them, it changed. When you had to do those access reviews, how many people have done access reviews? Only 5? Come on, I'm sure a lot more. Try to automate that. After selling that, my co-founder and I, we've gone off to focus on the consumer, who we see as an area that just has not been addressed, which I'm sure I'll get into in the panel, but focused on empowering and motivating consumers to take the appropriate actions to understand and reduce their risk of online identity theft, which we see as a big growth area.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm based in New York City. I work for Ernst & Young. I've been with the firm for about 6 months. I actually started my career many years ago in the technical space, so did a lot of work on complex proprietary networks, Unix operating systems, proprietary operating systems, spent some time at IBM, AT&T, and slowly made my way into the security space. Very passionate about security, very excited to be here today. I think there's still an incredible amount to be done. I like to see myself as a bit of a disruptor in this industry. I like to challenge the status quo. I think we need more of that. I spent a couple of years in London with PwC, which was wonderful, and then more recently I was down in Brazil for about 3 years building a security team out there for another management consultancy. But the areas that I'm really focused on right now is the strategy aspects of security, the governance, and more importantly, the people aspects. So how do people and where can people make a difference in security?
Great. Andrew.
So that picture up there is from my sister's wedding in 2009. My assistant sent the wrong picture in, and I'm looking at it and thinking, man, I had a lot of hair back then.
You're still good, great looking.
Yeah, I'm not going to participate in that project, Rafi. But no, in all seriousness, so security is, I think all of us have said, a part of our life. But it's been a part of my life since before I went to college. I wrote a hashing algorithm when I was in high school. It was terrible. It failed miserably. But it was still something that's been in my blood for a long time. And now I have been able to put security to the forefront of my career. For the largest part of my career, security was an afterthought. Whether it was as in product development, I worked on device drivers a very long time ago for a DEC, Digital Equipment Corporation, for those of you who don't even know that digital existed, which makes me sad. All the way through to now where I'm a CISO, the landscape has changed drastically to where people didn't even care about security, or security was the last thing that came along, and it was roll your eyes in the back of the head, fine, whatever, get the product shipped out the door. It was perfunctory at best. Whereas now, at the board level of most companies, they're in the existential crisis phase. Boards are frightened, and a frightened board is a bad board because they write lots of checks today. Then tomorrow they get really angry that they wrote the check because they're still afraid. They still think that they have a problem in front of them. So like William, I spend a lot of time on governance because part of the problem we have with cybersecurity in large multinational enterprises is governance. How do you think about it? How do you manage it? But also outside the company, Philips is almost $30 billion a year, and we are almost entirely moving towards an IoT-based and digital platform-based portfolio. Every device we ship outside from the standard light bulbs is connected. And then there's the Hue light bulbs, which are connected and have a famous security vulnerability in them. I'm not responsible for it, not my problem. But how do you govern it in the market? So I participate and co-chair a panel with the World Economic Forum. How do we govern security in the broader world? How do we allow a device to ship and make sure it doesn't kill someone or hurt someone? Or in the context of where we are talking about FinTech, how do we make sure that device isn't another step into your immersed digital life? Everyone in this room represents the future of wealth management. How I will likely manage my wealth 5 years, 10 years from now, and how my children will manage their wealth through their whole life. So how do we make sure we have governance models in place that get everyone together and stay committed to it, and don't be the frightened board? Just think about it at the beginning, don't think about it at the end, and then find a way to govern it as an ecosystem and as participants, rather than waiting for governments to come in and govern it for us, which for all of us in this room ends poorly, especially in an emerging market like FinTech. But I think we have a lot more to talk about.
So on this optimistic note, excellent. And together we are all going to make cybersecurity great again. and on that theme, let me dive in for the first question. So, President Trump, in January, a few days before the inauguration, made a promise that within 90 days, he will submit a comprehensive cybersecurity plan. These 90 days expired 2 days ago. And as many in the press have noted, deadline have come and gone, and there is no plan yet. So, it seems like perhaps the problem is even more complex than he realized. And I'm sure that this plan will be forthcoming. My first question to the panel is, if you're in charge of the new administration cybersecurity initiative, what would be your number one or the top 1 or 2 priorities focusing in this initiative? And since William suggested that question to me, I'll put you on the spot and let you kick it.
Well, you make it easy for me. No, but I think what's important to remember is we're in the early stages and early ages of cybersecurity. So I think from my perspective, there's 2 or 3 things that the administration should focus on. One would be public awareness campaigns. I find it shocking the level of understanding and the level of awareness of cybersecurity, which kind of ties into your point around the board. So if you think about, the fact that everyone now puts on their seatbelt or wears a helmet when they drive a car or ride a motorcycle, a lot of that is being driven by public awareness campaigns. Do not drink and drive. So I think a massive public awareness campaign about cybersecurity would produce some very powerful results. I think the second thing is around research and development, and not because we're in such an amazing place today, but I think there is so much more to be understood and done with regards to cybersecurity that I think by channeling more dollars, more brains, and more people at the problem, we would begin to see some more interesting solutions. And then the third thing, it's got to be about the skills shortage. Most experts say we're probably facing a shortage of about 1 million people in the industry. And that really bothers me and my clients, because you can build the best strategy on the planet, but if there's not enough people to execute it, we're going to have a problem. So I think those 3 things would be the first 3 things I'd focus on.
Excellent. Chris, do you want to?
Sure, I'll try to add a little bit. I think those are great areas. It's particularly the awareness, because the individual is the start of, or in the critical path of so many incidents. So I would expand a little bit on the. I would try to focus on 2 things, I think, that I would add. One is around the research and development. I would not decrease, but I would increase funding for fundamental research, not just on the technical side, but on the management side. I agree with you 100% that we are in very early days of cybersecurity. We're just getting people into chief security officer positions who aligned their profession from the very start around that, just beginning to get folks. And I ask, where's our balanced scorecard? Where's our value chain analysis, right? Where are the Michael Porter type books around management discipline? So it's not just the technology research. I think we have to fund basic research around management, science, and discipline, because I just don't think we know how to manage this. And which is why I think boards are afraid, because you're afraid of what you don't know how to deal with. The second thing is, and this may go against many people's view in the room, is I would find that the 1 or 2 most critical areas, and I would introduce some regulation, because in the short term, nothing motivated my old customers more than having to pass an audit. Now, I'm not a big fan of regulation. I'm a capitalist through and through. However, in the short term, for areas that are critical, it will get action. As an example, when HIPAA and meaningful use sort of regulations came through, all of a sudden in the identity and access management space, we saw healthcare become the #1 industry for purchase of identity access management, not finance, which is crazy. Usually for security acquisitions, it's for security product acquisitions, it's the financial world. So, and they ignored it forever, and they still have problems, as we discussed, major issues. But at least they started taking some steps. So I would take those two approaches.
Excellent. Andrew?
So I want to build on, it's a great point so far. I want to build on the skills piece that William brought up. I'm to the point in my organization where we generally do not hire cyber specialists outside of highly focused roles, primarily operations, engineering, and research. Outside of that, we look for people whose skill sets are portable. So our threat management team are primarily pure play ex-counterintelligence officers, or in some cases, criminal researchers from university that don't necessarily understand cyber, but have a skill set that I can help educate into cyber issues. Now, the upside of that is I get fresh perspectives, which is great. The downside of that is I have a loss of productivity up at the front. And that comes at a risk. That means my investment goes up. And that means from a management perspective, to get to Chris's point, my performance scores go down because my people don't have the same output. So I do think the government needs to take a role in working with institutions like MIT, working through DARPA, IARPA, InQtel, other groups to get that thinking out there, to get and almost help ferment people. And I use ferment because that means you have billions of cells working at once, trying to get this out and running. So that's one piece. The second piece, I want to touch on Chris's point about regulation. Now, I too am a capitalist, but I am a company that sells products in 120 countries. So regulation and I don't necessarily get along because once you have one country start to regulate, other large players around them start regulating. And we have one issue right now called the Wassenaar Arrangement, which is a diplomatic accord. If you're not aware of it, please go out and research it because it is interesting. And it is a set of diplomatic controls turning cyber technologies into weapons, turns most any cyber technology into something that's dual use and therefore needs export licenses to move around. It's the result of Arab Spring and US companies and European companies selling tools to essentially dictatorships in the Middle East and using them to inflict great social harm, which of course is very distasteful probably to all of us in this room. But that arrangement now swings the pendulum so far over to the right that now I have a team of 4 people who spend their time in The Hague and in Washington, D.C., working as essentially diplomatic support, helping support the US diplomatic mission, and we're a Dutch company, the Dutch diplomatic mission, to get them to change that regulation. My government relations people, my lobbyists, don't know anything about this topic. You go to Capitol Hill and you pull any lobbyists in the room, they don't know anything about this topic. So I agree, from a consumer protection perspective, we need that HIPAA-like regulation to help protect the consumer. But then we need incentives like you guys are going to hopefully drive with your new company, Chris. Give a Chris company a little plug. But we also have to avoid over-regulating. So I'd have to find that balance if I was a part of the, if in some alternate universe I was a part of the Trump administration. The second thing that I would focus on is what I call trust-based relationships. The US government sucks, and I'll be very blunt, at sharing information. They take, they want. They come in the room and they want you to tell everything. What do you see on your network? What threats have you seen recently? How are your employees behaving, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Because they need information. In the cyber landscape, they're so myopic, they can't see inside of the world that we represent. It's especially true in emerging industries. Again, I'll plug FinTech here, because they don't understand it. They have no way to see into it. They have no way to understand what the cyber dynamic is in your world. So they want. FBI, DSS, CIA, NSA, they all want. But you don't get anything back. You don't get anything to say, here's how I can protect my company more, protect my customers more. Outside of this country, In every country I have cyber operations in, we have a trust-based relationship where it's a two-way sharing. Now, the level of information we share, we're very careful and private about. We protect the consumer. We place that at its highest value. But at the same time, we're able to find a way to share information to make the company safer and better. This country has to find a way to solve that problem. If we don't, then we will end up in the Patriot Act era where companies don't want to comply. And companies start suing the government left and right, and then that hurts the consumer. And then they start passing laws like FISA, which if you're not familiar with, that's a part of the whole Russia investigation, where they compel companies to provide information in secret. And that is not a place you want to be. FISA orders are not very fun to deal with. They're not good. So how do we get the government to trust us as entrepreneurs and business people to share information with us so we can help make things safer? So those are two things I'd focus on.
I'll slightly disagree, but and add to it a bit tongue-in-cheek, because potentially the NSA gave us shadow brokers, and potentially the CIA gave us Vault 7 leaks. So we have a window into potentially what the government looks like when they're designing, malware and cyber operations and things like that. And so that was a tongue-in-cheek answer. But the real part that I want to emphasize is that at the bank, we have a pretty good relationship. There is a private sector security clearance program that individuals can get sponsored by their company to enter with the Department of Treasury and Department of Homeland Security, and potentially get a classified some sort of clearance and attend different briefings that are presented by the government. They're not super amazing. There are a lot, of generalized, the preconceived notions that you might have of what's being shared is generally spot on. It's something that there's some sort of give and take. There's a lot of things that are put out by the Treasury. There are people that work in the financial sector that do sit within our sort of like affiliated groups that then have good relationships with the government and pass on reporting. Generally, from our perspective, it's a bit slower than the financial sector. I mean, it's once you kind of get a sense of some blood in the water, the community of security experts just really attack it and try to find as much as possible. And given just a sort of if you kind of open source that process, which some forums have, it can be a lot more useful in terms of information sharing than waiting for the government to get a report to then give it a clearance that then can be shared with the general public. So there are some linkages. I will say though that the government has a good, they're a trendsetter a lot in the sense that the whole threat intelligence platform and industry really came alive after the government, as particularly DHS, made a decision that the way they're going to share and want indicators shared of different threat information is going to be sticks and taxi. And once kind of you saw that sort of like close and all these other sort of potential ways you could share information, kind of be relegated to that, then you kind of saw a whole market open up as to, okay, well, everybody wanted sticks and taxi shared information. So how are we going to do that? Because does your platform offer that? Yes? Okay, great. And that was kind of a big driver for the industry. The other thing is that in terms of, I think what I would suggest on the Trump EO would be or the whole new plan, would be to open up a little bit more in terms of transparency with respect to the skill set question, particularly on the certifications. Within DoD now, to get a security position, the Department of Defense requires certain certifications. So like if you're going to staff in their Security Operations Center, you have to be certified in X, Y, and Z, and they know those certifications. Exposing sort of what the government does and what expectation they have in terms of security staffings and what's the relevant knowledge they require would be useful in terms of our industry to figure out, okay, what should we require in terms of the people that we hire. And that's why there's just so much poaching going on when somebody comes out of the federal space or the military space in terms of being hired in the financial industry or in any other industry, because they've been through and they've been groomed and they've had the money to groom these people. And I agree with a lot of your points, Andrew, on making sure that the people that come in, you can groom different analysts, you can groom counterterrorism analysts, so long as you have a well-developed syllabus and funding to get them to that point. Otherwise, they're just in the lurch a little bit in terms of waiting to get trained to understand the data that they're seeing. So if you have those pieces in place, which it sounds like Philips does, that's wonderful. But without it, if you're going to miss some huge classes, you're going to have some gaping holes in potentially the people you're hiring, and so that's something that I would consider if I was writing.
Excellent point.
Yeah.
Excellent points. So I want to switch gears a second and talk about both within financial organization and any organization about the decision-making process around cybersecurity. And again, looking at cybersecurity as another form of risk and trying to rationalize, trying to justify, trying to look for the elusive ROI of cybersecurity decisions, trying to change perception in communicating with the top management and the board. Different angles here, and it's obviously evolving, but we are really talking about a new form of risk, which shares a lot of common characteristics with the risk, as we all know and love and been involved in the financial industry and others for many years. But we have here a new angle, and the question is, what's new and what's not new, and how do organizations today, when they make a decision and they need to justify a big investment to their CFO internally, how do they actually go about justifying, measuring the return, prioritizing, and treating it, as Chris mentioned earlier, as a business. And it's obviously on the maturity, it's moving, we're still in a very early stage of the maturity in this whole space, but we are forced to make decisions, we're forced to make very significant investments because the stakes are so high and the risks are significant, even if we don't know how to really measure them precisely. So I'm not sure, William, do you want to take
I can have a stab at it. I mean, I think, Chris, you brought up a very valid point before, which is the security industry is a little siloed, and we're not looking to business leaders for that input, for those methodologies that we so desperately need. I think the industry has focused far too long on the technical aspects, and we should and must think about things like job rotation. How can we get better involved with our business colleagues to use some of their great methodologies and experiences to produce more solid decisions? I think the other thing that's important, maybe to some of the points Michael brought up, is threat intelligence. I mean, that is a buzzword right now. The security industry is very excited about threat intelligence, and so am I. However, I think that oftentimes we have the wrong lens on threat intelligence. So we have technical people looking at the threat intelligence. If you can think about putting business people in front of the same screens, their perspective on that threat intelligence will be different. And then they can use that to help inform decisions around budgeting, around strategy, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's important. But I think the whole debate around ROI, which you mentioned earlier, that's inevitable, and that I think will carry on for a long time. Where I think the industry needs to go is think about how can cybersecurity become part of my value proposition. And I then think we will see a very interesting change in the industry. A lot of security professionals don't like that because they say that's going to focus the attacks in on me. My personal perspective is that's going to happen in any case, so bring it on. But I think if we as business people can think about how can cybersecurity become part of my value proposition, how can I sell more, increase stickiness, and attract consumers to deal with me because I'm using security as part of what I do and what I breathe and what I sell, then I think it'll make a difference in the industry.
Okay, great. Andrew, one of the things that Andrew mentioned to me in one of the recent MIT Philips research collaboration meetings was his frustration in discussion with the board about their lack of perception, maybe you'd use a different term, but he gave the analogy of the aha moment of realizing, as we all do at some point of our life, that we are someday going to die. And he made that analogy to the board, as far as board perception about the cybersecurity risk as applied to Philips or to the organization, a particular organization. Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, so the point was there are sort of, and this is going to sound a little macabre, but I think it's a model that resonates with a lot of people. There are 3 stages of realizing you're going to die. My 5-year-old just realized that people are going to die because my uncle, her granduncle, passed away. So she understands that people die, that they go away. And then, that sort of permeates through our late teen years when we do stupid crap like driving 100 miles an hour down the road with no seatbelt on, music blaring, and we've just done 3 lines of Coke, and we don't think anything bad's going to happen. And then there's some point where we go through this transition where we realize, holy heck, I'm going to die. I remember the exact moment it happened. And it becomes existential for that moment, like a Kafkian existential crisis. You literally say, holy, this is really going to happen. And then you get through that, and then you recalibrate your life, and you think, I'm going to live my life, and I'm going to make decisions based on the fact that I'm here for a limited amount of time. Boards are in the Kafka moment. There are some that aren't even in the Kafka moment, haven't even made it there yet, and when they do, that's not a good thing. But most boards are in that Kafka moment. They're in that crisis, they're afraid of it moment. So we've talked about ROI, we've talked about substantiation of risk. How do you guide them through that without selling them on fear? That you're going to die someday, so you have to drink kale juice. Drink kale juice, drink kale juice. You have to drink it. That's the wrong sell. Your product fails. Your concept ultimately fails. So what we're focusing on now is the pricing of risk, the value of intelligence, and demonstrating return through maturity. So we actually use the standard value at risk model to price risk. So we can price risk on a cash basis inside the company. And that's based on two things. One is the actual value of the underlying asset, even if it's intangible. So we spend $2.3 billion a year on just hard research. We probably only use 10% of that in a product. The rest of it goes off into the research bank to be used in the future. So there's risk there. How do you value that? And then counterintelligence. I hire counterintelligence officers who their job is not seeking out spies and like the Americans on TV. They're information brokers. They go to ask questions. They know how to ask the right question, and then they pass it on to the people who can execute the action. We take those folks, we pair them up with the right business people, and have them ask questions. What's valuable to you? What's important to you? What's at risk? Then I can come to the board and say, here's how much cash I have at risk, because here's how much this stuff is worth. Here's where the threat really is, so I can link this product that we make to this item in the Chinese strategic plan, or this value in certain terrorist areas. And now here's the impact based on the work that we've done, the maturity piece. I'm really good at doing this, so I can take this asset, I know it's under threat, and protect it. Therefore, here's how much cash you have to worry about walking out the door if it hits. And then on the other side of it is I say, we don't know what it is. We know we spent $1 billion in research there. We have no clue if it's under threat or not, and we have no clue if we can protect it. Therefore, you have $1 billion of cash that could just evaporate at any moment. You literally lost all that money because that IP walked out of the company. So that's provoked a very interesting dialogue with the board, more about balanced scorecard than about return. More about, so now how do I govern this? How do I make a decision on this, Andrew? And it's a tough discussion because they want to make a static decision. They don't realize that the static decision they make will be thrown out tomorrow when the threat landscape changes for Philips. So we spend a lot of our time on the scorecard piece. How do you govern me knowing that my market can become completely destroyed tomorrow? Not disrupted, destroyed. Because the threat profile fundamentally changed because of Vault 7. Vault 7 dropped something out in something that I thought I was really good at handling. I nearly hit you, I'm sorry. That's what you do to the consultants. You hit them because they make you look like a jerk in front of your board. But in all seriousness, they don't really understand that. They don't wrap their head around that. So that's really the governance piece, that balanced scorecard piece. How do I've given them the numbers, they buy it, they're good at making decisions and saying, go spend money here. But then when they come back, they want to say, so how are you performing? How do I know I'm turning the right dials or not as a board? So it's provoked an interesting discussion. It's going to continue to be an interesting discussion. The work we're doing with MIT is to put a finer point on that, rather than using a broad model like value at risk. But it will be interesting to see how the next couple of years run as boards go through that transition out of the existential crisis into okay, kale juice isn't the answer, but I'm going to lose some weight. I'm going to enjoy spending time with my kids. I'm not going to work 12 hours a day, getting them into the trade-offs perspective.
Excellent. So we have a lot of exciting questions streaming in, and we're a bit short of time. So I want to jump to, again, another dimension. I'm from Israel originally, and as many of you know, in Israel, there is an average of 3.4 cybersecurity startups per capita. I want to talk about the angle of the innovative technologies around cybersecurity, and touch also on technologies like blockchain. But let's talk about exciting things you are seeing on the innovative security solution space. Things that you feel could be disruptive, that are getting attention, and that you want to point out. So maybe Michael, you want to start?
A couple that come to mind would be, I think what's going to be important is deception technologies. I think that's been a driver. I'll just go through the three buzzwords. Ready? Deception technologies, security orchestration, and virtualizing your environments so that others can test them. In a sense, like the way bug bounties programs work, where we're going to give you an application and you try to find the vulnerabilities in it. Let's give you a lay of our mock network and see what type of vulnerabilities you can find, or what you can do in that network in terms of hacking it or whatever. That's very important for the regulators. It's very important for everyone, really, because it's very important for a lot of people are not just asking questions anymore about your security environment. They want to see it, they want to test it, they want to get their hands on it and see what they can do, and if you really are saying what you're saying you're doing. So that's one of the drivers. It's also important because internally you can have your staff train on things that you normally can't have them train on. So another big push in the industry is to develop teams internally that can hack your own systems, which are called red teams, or teams that defend against those, but in a certain other way, blue teams, purple teams, all these teams. And the whole purpose is to try to figure out what can they do internally, but they can't play on systems that are really, really, really valuable. Like, they're not going to play on your production systems that are really managing all the things you need to do. So if you design a mock network, you can potentially have them play on things that they normally can't. There are some companies in this space already. There's one that's really good in Boston, but this is only going to grow, and I think it's going to mature to the point where you can then you can train your staff. You can also test them and how good they are at responding on your mock network to things like Vault 7 malware or shadow brokers things, or things that are really popular in the press. You can let them run wild and see what they can do. But deception technologies is huge. Trying to put out a server out there that looks just like your normal proxy server and see who's going to attack it if you float some sort of interesting thing on it. And then the third one, which I'm blanking on right now, I believe, I can't remember what it was.
It'll come back to you.
Yeah, anyway.
Chris,
thanks.
I know covered security is in the process of changing the world. Any other, you covered is one definitely an interesting direction.
Yeah, well, so my response might not be too surprising to you. But so I think there certainly are a lot of interesting technologies that are focused on the technology, right? The behavioral analytics, there's a lot of investment right now, and there are a lot of interesting things, right, to catch transactions, fraudulent transactions, just by evaluating all of the different parameters that you can see around the transaction. However, I think a growing area that we're going to see is trying to crowdsource a little bit more, right? So the thing about hackers is, they're not all geniuses. There are some, but the thing about them is they collaborate like crazy. They've got great marketplaces. And we were talking a little bit about information share. We don't really collaborate. The good guys don't collaborate nearly as well as the bad guys. And I think what we're going to continue to see is more and more technologies trying to harness the power of all of the individuals involved in this. Our staff, our partners, our customers, because that's where so many of the problems start, right? Target started with a partner having their credentials compromised, right? So I think we're already beginning to see this in a focus on compensating controls, right? IBM's acquisition of Resilient, and that business has just, it was doing very well, but it just has taken off in terms of providing sort of the responsive side, the compensating control side, by engaging other people and pulling them in. And I think we're going to continue to see more and more of that. The other thing I'd say is I think there's a real challenge for us in the industry, the security industry, to whatever we deliver in the security technologies to not deliver it in a way that slows the business down, right? I mean, for you in the financial world, how many of you view, security as like the no, the Mr. and Ms. No, right? No, you can't do that. Or yes, you can do that, but you got to do this and spend this much more money and slow down. We've got to find ways to actually speed up the business with better security. And I think that as well, there's going to be, I hope, a little more focus on that.
That's great. So we have a lot of excellent questions, which we're not going to have time to get into, but I do want to touch on the first question, which is the security challenges associated with blockchain and increasing adoption of blockchain. And we obviously hear in this conference and others a lot about blockchain, different aspects of blockchain, smart contracts, and related topics. So, maybe a few words about the security angles here. William, do you want to say a few
Yeah,
things?
I mean, I don't pretend to be a blockchain expert, but I might be dating myself, but I think it's interesting because there does seem to be a lot of excitement, potentially even a bit of hype around blockchain. And when you begin to look at it, I think some of the security challenges with blockchain are the same challenges that we've been facing with other technologies for many years. Where are the people that really, really understand blockchain? I mean, I've sat in many meetings with blockchain experts watching them try to explain it to business people, and they've failed miserably. And I think if they can't explain blockchain to the business people who write the checks, who can protect the security, right? And then I think the other thing is the people aspect as it pertains to the interaction with the blockchain platform or ecosystem, let's call it that. I think, it's the last yard. It's about things like management of the keys, the administration of it. I think those are the things that are going to create problems. As we begin to put more and more trust in these extremely complex technical systems and platforms, how capable are we as security professionals to understand the complexities? It introduces a sense of opaqueness that we struggle to deal with. So I don't think it's the pure technical aspects. I think it's the people as it interacts with the technology that are going to create the problems.
Agreed.
So we're working through adoption of contracting and blockchain as a form of identity in healthcare. And for me, the technology, coming from a cryptographic background, it's immense to see business people in a room even talking like this. I mean, I lived in a backwater of the world that we were all, weirdo nerds playing, with, codes in the newspaper. But to me, the technology isn't my concern. My concern is what an identity is, right? We all have an identity in here because we can see, feel, touch it. It's tactile right now. We have an identity because we took a birth certificate to a DMV and they believed we had all the information that I was born in this city at this time, and here's your picture, here's your ID. In a world that's underpinned by concepts like blockchain, concepts like digital currencies and smart contracting for resource delivery. There's a power company that's currently playing with it, managing healthcare systems. How do you define who you are? And how do you prove it? Because you become so immensely tied to one thing, one key, one wallet, whatever word you want to use for it. You as an individual become tied to it. How do you prevent it from being stolen? Because the digital theft is very, very easy, even in the most secure systems. So recovery for that then links to an identity, proof of identity. And I don't see a solution for that. I still see people, I was talking with a bank in Europe that's looking at doing this as a way of overhauling the way they do intercountry currency exchange. And how do you prove that's your account to the bank? Because ultimately the bank is the arbiter of that account. How do you prove you have access to that? And cryptographic means are not perfect. They are subject to flaw. So how do you find that and link it to reality? And I don't see a solution for that. You guys may think that's really weird and esoteric, but it's just sort of the way my brain thinks. How do you prove it's you as a human?
Good point.
And then how do I trust you guys with, Robo? How do I know to trust you, that it's backed up by someone who actually knows what they're talking about? How do I build that form of trust and identity? And there's not an answer for that today.
So a key word that comes up, and it came up here, and it comes up in blockchain discussion, and it's an elusive word, and I've been and others have been thinking about it for a long time in different contexts, is the word trust, and again, its relation to risk, and what are the new dynamics of trust in these new landscapes? And again, obviously, blockchain interesting, exciting, overhyped in my opinion, but very interesting for sure. But brings in, rather than, brings in new sets of challenges. And again, it's part of the evolution of the cybersecurity and the evolving threat modeling. The one advantage of these modern environments, such as blockchain, such as digital currencies of all sorts, such as smart contracts, is that they design security, top-level cryptographic security up front, and they bypass much of the legacy steps, which actually cause many of the vulnerabilities in existing systems. So that's an advantage, but that's not to say, far as you all know, that these systems are bulletproof or sufficiently secure. And we've seen even cases in the last year, such as the DAO incident with the smart contract of Ethereum, where $60 million were hacked out of the system. And this is, again, just a sign of things to come in a space which, for sure, will continue to be challenging, evolving, and very, very interesting and exciting. So a lot to talk about moving forward in future FinTech events. I want to thank the panel. Priscilla is signaling to me that our time is up. I want to thank the audience and the panels for a very interesting, as expected, interesting and very diverse set of opinions. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the conference.